Well, happy Labor Day weekend. Seems odd that it is Labor Day, but that's the day that most people don't have to labor. That's odd. What would you think if we announced we were going to have a church work day on the grounds and we got there, we said nobody's going to do anything? So I thought it's a work day. Well, it is. Work means you're not going to do anything. Well, Labor Day, but nobody works. So I was often confused about that until I realized what Labor Day was. Actually, in 1894, President Grover Cleveland decreed that we would set aside the first Monday in September as a recognition of the laborers in America, in honor of laborers, the working force, the backbone of America. So we have Labor Day because it is honoring the laborers, the workers, you and others who are working, going to work every day. So that's Labor Day. That's why we are here. Now, that's why we have this Labor Day coming up that we celebrate. Now, we're going to look at the scriptures in Proverbs chapter 6, and beginning with verse 6, it says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard." A sluggard is a person who doesn't want to work, okay? "And consider her ways, and be wise. Without having a chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want will come upon you," he's saying, "like an armed man." Now, when we think about passages like this, we think, well, why would something like that actually be in the Bible? A lot of people misunderstand Christianity to merely be a method or the method of salvation. Well, folks, that's not all Christianity is. Remember, the Bible's first verse is not John 3:16, that God so loved the world, okay? The first verse is, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Christianity is not only the true religion, it's not only the way to heaven, but it is also a worldview. It speaks to the fact of what every worldview has to speak to. There is a God. Okay? How did we get here? How are we supposed to live? What's our destiny? What's wrong with the world that we live in? Okay? What's the solution, folks? Every worldview has to answer those kinds of questions. And Christianity does that because it is a worldview. It speaks to all of the issues, either directly or indirectly, that we actually face in our lives. So we shouldn't be surprised that it actually has something to say to us about work. Okay? Christianity is not just getting us to heaven, it's instructing us how we're supposed to live on the way of getting there. Okay? And so, we should not be surprised that this topic is covered. It's a very important topic, and we shouldn't be surprised that it's in a book like Proverbs, because that is under the category of how we categorize books in the Old Testament in particular as wisdom literature. What those books are teaching us is how to live with godly wisdom in light of the fact that God created us and created us in His image and created us for a purpose. And so He didn't leave us in the dark trying to figure out then how are we supposed to live in light of that. And so He addresses even an issue here like work. Okay? It's part of who we are as believers. Now, what the wise man of the Old Testament does here is teaches us some things about work by appealing to nature. Look at how God created other creatures that are really of lesser intelligence or whatever than we are, but we can still learn from them. He says to learn from nature, and in this case, it is the ant. And so as we look at this passage, what does God tell us about labor? What does he tell us about work in looking at the ant? First of all, I want you to see that these ants work in accordance with their God-given abilities. Okay? God gave them an ability to work. Okay? Now, God does not miraculously feed the ants, but he does feed them. Okay? He provides the means for them to go out and get their food. With ants, he gives them an instinct. They act according to that instinct. You know, Jesus spoke somewhat of the birds of the air. What did he say about it? The birds of the air, he says, God feeds them. You said, well, wait a minute. I watch them. God doesn't feed them. They actually go out and get their worms or what. Yes, but that's God feeding them. God provided the worm. God gave them the instinct. And if it were possible for a bird just to say, well, God said he provides for me, so I'm just going to wait for him to do it. Well, that bird would starve. Because that bird would be expecting God miraculously to do something that God had already provided for. So they use it. Now, what's God telling us there? He's telling us we are supposed to use our God-given gifts to go out and work and make a living for ourselves. Okay? We are not to trust God to do something for us that he already empowered us to do and has actually told us to do. Now, I have found out that in a lot of ways you can categorize people. Sometimes I think of Christians that I've met and talked to, and some tend to fall in one of two categories. We need to ask God and pray and trust God and let him provide. And then you got those over here that don't do much about praying. They're just going to work and do it on their own and strive and forget that God is the one who provides. Because what we're supposed to do is the combination of both. We're supposed to acknowledge that God has given to us and provided for us, but sometimes we're supposed to get up and do something on our own. And folks, I am not at all here denying the importance of prayer. Folks, every growing Christian should be a praying individual. Every thriving and flourishing church ought to be a praying church. The point is, sometimes we can be praying when we actually ought to be doing something ourselves with what God has already provided for us. This was illustrated greatly in the great evangelist D.L. Moody. D.L. Moody was on a boat one time, many passengers, and the boat sprung a leak. And they were very concerned, and so they did what they did in that day until they could get it fixed. They had that bucket line. You had several buckets, and people would try to get the water out faster than it was coming in while it was being fixed. While they were passing these buckets to get this water out of the boat, one of the very pious church members that was with Dr. Moody said, Mr. Moody, why don't you and I go up on the deck and pray and ask God to deliver us? And Moody just kept asking. He says, I got a better idea. Why don't we ask God to deliver us while we're standing here passing the buckets? Okay? Well, that's the biblical way. Okay? There is a place for prayer, and they should have been praying, and I'm sure he was. But they also needed to be in the bucket line to do what God had actually empowered them to do. And so God has given us things. God has already supplied for us, but we are supposed to use what he has supplied, not to keep us from our responsibilities and to keep us from working, but in order to work. God has already supplied. Folks, I know it sounds strange, but I'll show you biblically. Sometimes we might be praying when we ought to be doing something instead. Okay? Now, I also know there are times that we ought to probably be praying instead of doing something. But there are times when we need to stop praying and start acting on what God actually empowered us to do. You remember at when the Israelites moved into the promised land, the first battle they had was at Jericho. It went very well. Okay? Captured Jericho. The next town they went to was a town called Ai. It was a little small town. It wasn't going to be any problem. Okay? In fact, they didn't even use the entire army to go in there. They had just gotten each other's way. Okay? So they went in. The problem is they were completely routed and lost, I think it was 7 people in the battle. And Joshua goes before the Lord, falls down in prayer saying, what in the world are you doing? You told us to go in there. You gave us, and you might know what God said to him while he was on his face in prayer. He said, get up. What? I'm praying. I know what you're doing. Get up. It's not time to pray. There's sin in the camp that caused this failure, and you need to go take care of it. Everybody understand? Okay? There's a time to get up and do something. And the ants tell us God gave us God-given abilities, but it is in order for us to do what he has told us to do, not a replacement for it. God tells us in Deuteronomy 8:18, it is God that has given you the ability to work. That means God and us work together in tandem. We could not do what we are doing without God. But God is not going to do it for us when he has provided the means for us to do it and told us to do it. And these ants do not wait for God to feed them. They go to work and earn a living. Okay? But it is still God who has provided for them. That's why we're thankful that God has allowed us to be able to make a living. Has given us the intelligence, the knowledge, the strength, allows us to do it. But he expects us to work. That's part of God's plan. I want you to notice something else about the ants here. Notice how industrious they are. How they work. I remember as a kid, when I had time and the inclination to lie down on the grass out in the yard, sometime an ant would catch my attention. And so I just have to watch it fall, particularly if it was carrying something. Folks, those ants would actually carry things that were 6 to 8 to 10 times larger than they were. And they could actually move them. And they just go and go and go. And in fact, I remember when I was a kid in grade school, somebody brought to school what they called an ant farm. Do they still do those? It's almost like an aquarium that you've got these ants in. And my fear when I saw those in school, because I tended to do things wrong sometimes, not intentionally, but I had this constant fear that I was at school and I knocked that thing over and ants were everywhere and we could never get them out of the school. Okay? But the fact is, it was absolutely amazing to watch those ants work, to watch how they tunnel, watch how they work together. It was just amazing to see that. They work. The Bible teaches us the importance of work. That's why it calls our attention to the ants. When Adam was created, he was told to work. Okay? A lot of people have the impression that Adam started working after the fall of man into sin, and he didn't have to work before that. That sin's work's part of the payment for sin. That's not true. Now, the Bible says work became more of a drudgery afterward. Okay? But he was actually told to subdue the earth. I don't particularly like that word because particularly the proper modern connotations. Basically what he's saying is harness the laws, the physical laws, and use them to make the earth flourish. Okay? He was supposed to be working. Jesus worked. Paul worked. When we look at work, is not a part of the curse on us. It's part of us being made in the image of God and carrying out to fulfillment what he's actually called us to do. Mark Twain was not at his best. Some people will never all at our best. When he said work is a necessary evil. Well, God didn't look at it that way. God doesn't see it as being an evil at all. God sees it as being a very important part of our lives. Now, we have to be careful, folks. When we get things out of kilter and place work in a place that it should not be in our lives. See, some people go to the extreme, laziness, don't want to work at all. But some people go to the other extreme. Remember, I've told you before, Martin Luther said, God, the devil doesn't care which side of your horse you fall off of, as long as you fall off. Okay? Some people take work, they don't want to work, they're lazy. Okay? You've got other people that totally immerse themselves in it, and it dominates their lives. Folks, work can become a form of idolatry. I've seen families that have been absolutely destroyed because the father wouldn't work. I've seen families absolutely destroyed because the father wouldn't do anything but work, okay, and left the family out altogether. When we fail to keep work in our biblical, godly perspective, then the results are going to be disastrous. So they are industrious. They're diligent. And if you look at verse 8, look how it speaks of their wisdom. Well, it says in verse 6, be wise like them. Prepares bread in summer. Now, he doesn't mean literally they make loaves of bread, but they prepare their bread. They do something close to that. I wish I had time to tell you more about ants. They actually do something close to that. Analogous to our making of bread, they actually do that. They gather food in the harvest. In other words, with their work, they're wise and they're prudent. They are giving us an example of knowing how to save some of what we make. You see, that's actually what they do. They have to eat some of what they're bringing into their nest, but they also set some aside for other times when things are not so readily available. In other words, we always say we need to put aside some stuff for a rainy day. Well, that's what they do. They actually do save. Now, folks, again, some Christians need to learn that. There are some Christians that are not careful with their money, and it burns their pocket or their hand until they spend it. They have to, and when the time comes they're in need, okay, it creates a problem for them. It wreaks havoc in their family because they didn't plan. Saving. Now, and there are some Christians, and I will say as we seldom do, bless their heart. Okay? Bless their heart. They have the idea that if you save anything, put it in the bank, it's a way of not trusting God. Okay? And so you don't need to be putting something away for a rainy day. God's going to take care of you in a rainy day. Yeah, God told you to look out for that rainy day and be prepared for it, and that's usually how He prepares you for it. Because I'm not saying God can't miraculously provide for you sometimes. I'm saying that's not His modus operandi. That's not how He usually operates. If you put away something, and so if you have insurance, that's just not trusting God. Well, folks, if you go back and remember the story of Joseph, you remember how he got elevated to the position, the kingdom that he was in? Because he interpreted the dream of the Pharaoh. And the dream, what he told, so what this means, is we are going to have 7 years of great prosperity agriculturally. Okay? We're going to have food in abundance and supply. Now, unfortunately, 7 years after that, there is going to be great famine. A lot of people could die. So what does wisdom dictate that we do? Well, that during those 7 years, we build barns, whatever else we do, and put up and store grain and save it and to prepare for the 7 years. Notice what that godly man Joseph did not say. Listen, we're going to have 7 bad years, but God's going to take care of us. Now, did God take care of them? Yes. How did He take care of them? He took care of them by them deciding during that 7 years of plenty, we are going to store up enough to help us get through the 7 years where we do not have plenty. Everybody with me? Okay? We're just going to join in with God and prepare for our future. And the wise man of the Old Testament has said that's exactly what the ants do. If you need to, learn your lesson from them. But also like something else. Folks, they know how to store something up. They know how to save. But let me tell you this, they also know how to spend it. Ants are really, really good with using what they have in the best way. They share it with each other. You see, they wouldn't know anything about bringing something into the nest. And then several months later, the other hungry ants started to eat on it, and they say, I'm the one that brought that in. That's mine. You know, they actually share it. You know, folks, God gives us an abundance, not so we can just simply cast that upon ourselves, but it's so we can be conduits of blessings into the lives of other people. Okay? It's so that we can be channels through whom God meets the needs of other people. And they get blessed. But you know what? If we have the right attitude, remember what Jesus said? Hey, the person who's giving it actually gets a greater blessing than the person who receives it. That's Jesus' words. You know, he said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. And these ants are doing that all the time. And that's why Paul, in Ephesians, he said, those of you who have been thieves and you've gotten converted now, go out and get a job. Now, he said, go out and get a job, then you won't be inclined to steal anymore. But he also said this, go out and get a job, earn some money so that you will be able to help those people who are in need. So, he said, be like the ants, okay? They know how to save money. They also know how to spend it. They know how to share it. Folks, that's why we think so much of the Good Samaritan in that story. He meets a man in need. And folks, remember, if he didn't have any money saved up, he couldn't have helped this man very much, even if he'd have wanted to. But he took him to the end, remember, and turned the money over and said, look, if it cost, how did he do that? Well, folks, he had to have some money that he had saved up that he had to spend on himself. And he found great joy in being able to be a blessing to someone else in need. And that's precisely what these ants do. Now, there's also something else that it speaks of that they do. They work together in unity and harmony. They work together in unity and harmony. I've seen, again, watching these ants, I've seen them, carrying something 8 or 10 times their size and weight and get hung on something. You know, they just keep trying. And you know what a lot of times happens? Another one comes along. And he gets along with it, and he actually helps them get it over that hump until he can get it back to the nest. Because that's just working together. Because did you know some people can't do that? They just can't work with other people. And I have no reason, no idea why that would be, you know. But a lot of times, I guess, it's just because they're too concerned that somebody else might get the credit instead of them, you know. So I'm not going to, if you're going to get the credit for doing this, I'm not going to help, you know. Well, that's not the biblical attitude, and it's certainly not what the ants are actually telling us to do. They actually work together. Now, it says here, they don't have, in verse 7, a chief officer or a ruler. In other words, it doesn't mean that they don't have some kind of scale here on which they actually do. Okay? What he's saying here is they don't have to have that. They don't have to have a supervisor watching over them all the time. And that's the thing. You get out, you watch one work. I've never seen one look around like, you know, the chief ant's not here. I'm going to rest a while. I'm just not going. Folks, I wonder how much money we have to spend in America annually to just hire people to watch over other people to make sure they're doing their job. Folks, a Christian should never fall into that category of having to have somebody look over them. A Christian, above all else, ought to be saying, this is a form, as I'm going to try to show, of service unto God. You know, Christians certainly shouldn't, but that's what it is to work together. Work together. A lot of times, in the position I'm in at the university, don't get as many as I used to, but references. Somebody will want a reference on a student, you know. And one of the questions that I ask is, can this person work well with other people? Well, that's a very important question. Because very, very few jobs is a person out simply working completely by himself or herself. If they can't work with others, what these people are saying, we don't need them. But Christians, above all people, ought to be able to work with other people. But there's a difference, folks, in working in unity and working in harmony. Unity means you're working all together. Harmony includes that, but it carries with it the idea they're working in harmony, but they're not all doing the same thing. All of them are playing their parts. That's why when you hear, I guess probably hear it more than in a barbershop quartet, you hear those people singing. They're singing the same song. They're in unity, okay? One of them's not singing one song, one of them another. They're together. But one of them's singing one part, one of them's singing another one another, and they are singing in harmony. Okay? Their voices are different, and they blend together to make that one perfect whole. Okay? And that's the way we are as Christians. God tells us, I have not given each of you the same spiritual gift. Some of you can do things spiritually are gifted that other people are not good at doing. Okay? So that's why we all need each other. We all have to be playing our role and working together in harmony. Everybody doing their part. Now, when I was a pastor and we had people visit our church and they would sign that little thing saying, we're interested in being members. Of course, I would always go visit. And one of the first questions when we started to get down to detail, one of the first questions I would ask them, and I said, let me ask y'all a question. And I know what they were expecting. Or they were expecting me to say, let me tell you what our church has to offer you. But that's not what I would say. I would say the main question on my mind is, you want to join our church. What have you got to offer us? Well, we probably lost some prospects that way. But I'll guarantee you we didn't pick up any dead weight either. You know, if you're not interested in doing something, you're just interested in us doing for you, you're in the wrong place. Because we work here together in harmony. That means if you come in, you've got a role to play, and we are to work together in bringing this about. Those ants work in harmony together. Because it says with the overseers, they work by themselves. Don't need, and perseverance. I have never seen a better example of perseverance in my life than ants. Like I've seen them run into something, and they don't give up. They just keep on and on and on until they get it done. They don't quit. And then I'll tell you what I've done, and it's the same thing you've done before. Okay? You can deny it if you want to, but the only difference is I'm telling the truth and you're not. Okay? I've seen those ant hills, and I've kicked the top off of them. You know I'm telling the truth. And you know what we saw? I'll tell you what we didn't say. Well, I'm not building that again. I built that thing at one time. I'm just not doing it again. No, they immediately go to work, and they start building it back. Now, I never have stood around long enough to do it again. But if I did, they'd do the same thing again. Okay? They persevere. They do not know the meaning of I quit. Folks, there's no value in, let me ask you a question. How many books have you ever read on how to quit? You ever read any good books on that lately? You ever seen any little shibboleths on Facebook or anything that told you how to quit? And folks, everybody knows how to quit. That's the easiest thing in the world to do is quit. But what about perseverance? Because that's a different story. They persevere. Folks, if anybody ought to persevere, it is Christian people that are doing what we're doing, as I want you to see, to the glory of God. Now, folks, Colossians 3. I started to preach the whole sermon on this passage. I thought, well, I'll just make quick points on it at the very end. Colossians chapter 3, verses 23 and 24 says this. Whatever you do it heartily, full of life. George, here. As unto the Lord and not unto men. That means when you go to work and you get a paycheck, you say, well, I'm working for these people. A Christian ought to say, in a secondary way, I'm working for that person. In a primary way, I'm working for God because I'm doing everything I do as unto the Lord. I'm doing it as an offering to Him. Now, folks, that's difficult a lot of times for us, and here's why. We tend in our minds to separate what we may not call it by these names, but we do it, the sacred from the secular. If you're doing something like praying or here worshiping, that's spiritual, that's sacred. But now when I go off on my job, that's a secular thing. Folks, that should be as much a service done as a service to God as anything else we do. We separate those things out. And that makes it, another thing that makes that difficult. When our young people are coming around trying to figure out, what kind of job should I be doing? Folks, they're looking for a vocation. We call that a vocation. Listen, folks, that word, English word vocation, comes from the Latin word that means calling. They're supposed to be looking for their calling, not how to make money or where to get a job, but how to fulfill a calling that God has placed on my life. We've too often given people the idea. Now look, if you're going in the ministry, you need to be called from God. If you're going to be a truck driver, you don't need to be called from God. You just choose what you want to do. But folks, that's foreign to what the Bible has to say. The Bible says we're supposed to have a vocation. We are supposed to do what God called us to do. It's not just vocational ministers that ought to be praying about what job God wants them to do. Because all of those jobs are part of a fulfilling of God's plan for us. God does not say about your work that you may refer to as secular work. God does not say, not interested. Just be at church Sunday. Just pray. God expects us to fulfill His call. And where we have often made the mistake, even churches, is conveying this idea, and I think it's been unintentional. But if you really mean business with God, you're going to be a preacher. If you're a woman, maybe not, but you're going to be a missionary. I just want to know how devoted to God you are. Well, folks, the problem is we have many young people that said, I'm completely devoted to God. I guess I have to be a missionary. And God didn't call them to be missionaries. He called them to do something else, but to do it to His glory. I have a friend right now I grew up in church with. He is a pediatrician. And he basically fell into that same kind of a trap. He loves the Lord, totally devoted. And he was hearing obviously the same thing. If you're going to be completely devoted to the Lord, you go to the mission field. And so he committed his life publicly to be a missionary. Well, folks, later he realized that wasn't what God wanted him to do at all. Okay? He didn't really call me to be a missionary. He actually called me to be a pediatrician and to be of service to people. And folks, I can give you examples of people that he saw their babies and their young children, and they didn't have the money. And he just wrote it off. Yeah, no charge. But you see, he was being a missionary in a sense. What he was doing is saying, I'm going to fulfill my vocation. I'm going to fulfill what God called me to do. Folks, if we would actually see our jobs as a calling of God and a way to serve God, you know what would never be a part of our thinking pattern? What the secular world calls hump day. What is hump day? That's Wednesday. You know what? Because you're over the hump of the week. If you just do Thursday and Friday and get to the weekend, you're going to be free. Folks, you know what that means? That means you're living 2 days a week and you're not living the other 5. You're just trying to get through those till you can get to the 2. And that means 5/7 of your life is a waste. You see, if a person sees his or her job as a calling from God, they love to get up in the morning. And they say, as Colossians said, I'm doing this as unto the Lord. This is a part of my service to Him. I'm doing it because I'm called to do it. I met with a pulpit committee one time, years ago. And they asked me every kind of question you could ask somebody for 30 or 40 minutes. And then they said, okay, ask us some questions, whatever you want to ask. I thought, well, a good thing to do to get to know them personally. So I just turned to the man that was sitting on the right and I said, what do you do for a living? And he said, I'm an ordained plumber. I said, I didn't know we ordained plumbers. He said, we don't. God does. God called me to be a plumber. God call you to be a preacher? I said, yes, sir. He said, God called me to be a plumber. Do you try to be the best preacher for Jesus you can be? I said, yes, sir. He said, I try to be the best plumber I can be for Jesus. I thought, my friend, may your tribe increase. Man, that's a guy that caught on. That's a guy that understood what labor in the sight of God was all about, that it was a vocation, that it was a calling, that it was a form of service to God and his community to help his community flourish. When I had a chemistry teacher in high school. I think he only taught a couple of years. He decided to go to dental school and became a dentist. And actually, I saw Dr. Strong probably 10 or 12 years ago, so almost 40 years after I got out of school, I had not seen him. And he was actually in a church where I was doing a series of teaching over the book of Romans. And when I saw him, I knew exactly who it was. And so I spoke to him, and he said, man, this is great. He said, you got service tomorrow night. Would you come to my house earlier and let's eat and talk about before that? Man, I would love to. And he said, I said, I can actually bring my high school annual. You signed it, you know, and we can look through it. He said, man, that will be great. And so we did. We looked through it and had a good time. And he said, I got some things I want to show you. That's fine. So he came back and brought a big photo album. And he said, these are some pictures that I've taken through the years of trips that I have taken overseas to do dental work on people that have never seen a dentist or never would see one. And so as he was flipping through, he said, see these pictures right here? He said, if you remember the Sandinista War in Nicaragua, and he said, you remember what's going on? He said, I was here in Nicaragua. He said, you could actually hear the bombs dropping and guns firing when I was in there working on their teeth. But then he said something that I will never forget. And it's exactly the point that I wanted to leave with you. He said, you know, when I go down there and I start to work on a person's teeth, he said, before I ever touch them, he said, I pray to pray. And he said, this is what I pray. Every day. Lord, you gave me the abilities to do what I do. You gave me my hands. You gave me the privilege and opened the door for me to go to dental school. You provided the money for me to get through. The education for me to know how to do what I'm getting ready to do. You provided every bit of that. And so, if I could just take what I'm getting ready to do, and I would like to offer it to you as a sacrifice of appreciation of what you've done. Folks, that will transform your attitude toward work. Find where God wants you to be. That is your vocation, your call. See it as a calling from God. And as a way to do what you're doing, not ultimately as up to men, but unto God. And if we see it that way, we'll do everything the ant says has taught us to do. We'll work industriously. We'll share with each other. We'll save when we need to. We'll help provide for the needs of others. We'll do all the things we're supposed to if we get that first thing right. And that is, work is a calling from God. That it's a joy for us to be co-laborers